There are husbands and wives, fathers and daughters, women who have just chosen this industry because they've fallen in love with it and they really want to see it do well, or they want to do well within it. I think there's room for all of that.
This is Shop Talk Her Way with JeanAnn SaintGrace.
I have had a lot of people ask me what it's like to be a woman in the automotive repair industry, mostly because it is male dominated, has been for a long time, but I think there's some changes coming and I'd like to share my experiences. So stick with me for this episode of Shop Talk Her Way. This is JeanAnn SaintGrace, and I'm going to talk a little bit about not just my experiences, but experiences that I've seen, people that I know. But it's important to encourage people to open their eyes to kind of what it is like to be a woman in this industry, and especially as we want to welcome and include more women into the industry, I think it's important that we see where we've been, where we are, and where we might be going. So thank you for joining me for this episode. It's kind of funny because I honestly never thought of myself as being anything but a person in the automotive industry. I didn't really think that I was doing anything out of the ordinary. I grew up in self-employment, so my parents ran their business together. My dad had most of the operations, and then my mom did the bookkeeping, that kind of stuff. And that was kind of the model that I grew up in. And I knew a lot of husband and wife businesses, so those were things that I was used to. I was always kind of idealistic, so I never really took anything, too personally. I was never one of those, like soft-shelled people. A lot of stuff just kind of bounced off. I grew up around truck drivers. Like you can't be a kid growing up around truck drivers and not understand that, they are, there's guy talk, there's past guy talk, there's, things that we would talk about right, now is like, probably misogynistic talk. And I grew up in the 70s, like those were things that were not talked about. I always thought it was cool when I ran across a woman in business. Agriculture was very much a male dominant business as well, but there were some really standout women that were becoming leaders as I was getting into the industry, going to school and being influenced by that. I was raised in and around strong women, so it never really dawned on me that I was at any kind of a disadvantage. And I just never felt that way. The challenges of being a woman in a male dominated industry are sometimes you're going to run up against the guy who wants to, what I call, little lady you. And it's like, oh, come on now, little lady, you can't possibly know this, that, or the other thing because you're not a dude. There can sometimes be a perception of weakness, especially if you're like me, and when you get really mad, you start to cry, and not for not for sympathy, but just because my emotions get so big sometimes that I have to excuse myself and go cry somewhere and wipe the mascara off my face and go back in. But the ones that really surprised me the most, honestly, were the women who treated me as less than when I was there to serve them. And it happened more than once. And there's a few standout experiences, when, I had multiple, men and women walk in the shop and be like, I want to talk to a technician. As an advisor and as a shop owner, our techs are there to work. Our techs are not there to be our public face. Some of them are really good at it, and there were times if it was important for me to have the tech come and explain things, I would. But in general, what those people were asking were, I need some advice about my vehicle, and as a service advisor, I was the one to give it to them. In any shop, we don't want to be diagnosing things over the counter, and technicians are really good at sharing their information, and bless their hearts for that. But sometimes we need to charge for that. And that doesn't always happen in a conversation. And, the techs also are not, they don't know what the schedule looks like. They don't know when we can get the vehicle in. So as an advisor, building that relationship with the client was really, really important. And I did have a reputation in our small town that I was the one who wouldn't let somebody talk to a tech. And, they probably meant that as an insult, but I was like, you know what? I pay my techs to work. If they're talking on the phone, they're not producing. And if they're flat rate techs, or if they're, base plus commission, they're not making any money doing that. And so we can't expect them to be that part of the business if they don't have a reward for it. So I was protecting my techs. I was protecting my shop. And it just wasn't appropriate a lot of the time for people to be asking technicians any kinds of questions over the counter. So yeah, that earned me the, witch that starts with a B. And hey, you know what? I don't care. I didn't care then, and I really don't care now. You learn how to let those things go, because a lot of times the source. But it was surprising when I was confronted by a woman who wanted to talk to a man, um, and and would really get mad when I wouldn't let that happen. And it's not like I was, authoritarian and just like, oh no, you can't. There were times when it was appropriate, but there are times when it wasn't. I had one customer who on a regular basis would walk in and ask me a question, and then want to talk to my husband. And it took me a few times to figure out his game, but he would ask me the question, and then my husband would come into the office, and he would ask him the same question, and then be like, oh, that's what she said. And it got to be really annoying, because my husband trained me. Like, everything I learned about cars, I learned from him. So of course, the words that came out of my mouth were his knowledge, just in my voice. And it got to be after, 3 or 4 times when I figured out the game, because it's really what it was. The guy never wanted to spend any money. He was just in there busting my chops more than anything else. And I'd like walk out in the shop and be like, oh, nope, he's on the phone, can't come in, sorry, bye-bye. But that was insulting. That was really insulting. And just a waste of our time, right? Like, we had way bigger fish to fry than playing stupid games. And there were also those times where, and these are probably the most rewarding for me, when people have underestimated me, and then given me a chance, and then figured out that I knew what I was talking about. And it happened more than once in the shop, right? That they would come in skeptical, and then be my biggest fans, and telling their friends and family, hey, you got to go see that girl at Colony. She knows what she's talking about. And I had I think the best ones are the older men, that were old enough to be my dad and granddad, that would come in and rib me in a good natured way and put me through my paces. But I had one gentleman who'd come in, and he was always, he didn't know a lot about cars, but he was a real sweetheart. And he every time he walked out, he's like, don't forget to rotate my muffler bearings. So that was our big joke. That was really sweet, that was his like line every time, was don't forget to rotate those muffler bearings. So, building rapport, cracking those barriers, those were always my favorites. And getting them to understand that I knew what I was talking about, and that if I needed backup, I had it. More recently, when I stepped into the coaching realm, and when I was doing, which I still do, but when I was doing this more as my main line of coaching individuals, I really wanted to coach men because a lot of men, don't seek help. They don't go out and actively look for a coach or somebody where they can unload their stresses in a setting where they can just talk and maybe get some advice and learn how to grow as a person, improve their leadership skills. There's not a lot of avenue for that, in the private sector. But I always wanted that, and so when I was offered an automotive coaching job, it really ticked that box that I would get to work with men and help them not only make their businesses better, but also grow their leadership skills, grow as people, learn about themselves and other people, and build better culture in their shops. That was really, really, really rewarding, and really I felt like a huge opportunity. And there were there were some gentlemen who put me through my paces. They didn't make it easy for me. And I'm not asking for it to be easy, but I'm asking for an opportunity, right? There are those people who are just like, she's a woman, she's a girl, she doesn't know what she's talking about. And once they got past that, then I really earned their respect. And there was more than one, and more than one who wasn't afraid to tell me, when we first started together, I was really skeptical and I didn't know how this was going to go, but you've really proven yourself to me and given me good advice. And, the reward was that a lot of times we were seeing them have their best weeks, their best months, their best years. And you may or may not be able to tell my coaching style is very much, this is what I see for you. What do you think about that? How can we implement this? It's shop talk her way, but it really has always been your shop your way. I'm not the one in the shop day in and day out having to implement these things. And it's important for me to remember that it is their business. And it's important for every coach to remember that it's not, as much as you may care, as much as you may want to see them grow, until they're ready to adopt whatever you're asking them to do, they have to figure it out. So, having maybe a softer style of coaching where I put out ideas and we talk about them and they maybe choose to adopt them. I kind of have to credit my husband with that, my first husband, because he told me at some point, he's like, you got to plant the seeds. And I think he was talking about himself with that, because I don't exactly remember the conversation, but he's like, you've got to plant the seeds. You've got to let those seeds, be planted, be watered, have that conversation a couple times, and then let them grow. And he was definitely talking about himself and things that we needed to do, because, telling him what to do was probably not going to happen. But if I planted the seeds, then they might come to fruition. And so a lot of that is my coaching style. I see this, I see that. What do you think? How do you think we can implement that? Do you need some help? Do you need some ideas? But when I was leaving my first coaching job and having to say goodbye to all of these wonderful people that I had been working with, who then told me, we were skeptical. We didn't really know how this was going to go. And, whether I'd proven myself to them or I'd helped them, or been one of the best coaches they'd ever worked with. And I don't say that from ego. I'm saying that from, I was able to overcome their skepticism and get to that point where I had become a trusted advisor to them. That meant the world to me. I honestly, I didn't ever register that. I never doubted myself. I never doubted my expertise. I didn't realize that they thought I was a lot younger than I am, that I might not have the business chops, that they might have, gotten hung with somebody who had the title of coach but didn't have the expertise to back it up. So, and then you also get the ones that are just never going to let you be. They're never going to trust you, they're never going to accept you, they're never going to do that, and in that case they need a different coach, and that's okay. um and for other women in the industry, like I said, I've seen everything from the husband and wife team, the father daughter team, the female owned shop. There's a number of those out there. Women who get into the industry for through whatever path, whether they started off in parts and moved into service or moved into operations because they were good at what they did, and they were able to walk both sides. I hate to say this to you and to the audience, but I want to be clear. Sometimes working with men, they're not always the softest creatures, right? And sometimes you have to separate their language from their message. And women too. Like, there are times when you might lose your your stuff, you might lose your temper, you might say something the wrong way. But and it was funny when I started with the big coaching company, their HR person was like, well, sometimes it can get a little rough. And I didn't really know what she meant to say, but she was talking about the language, the way people talk. And I've had clients call me honey or sweetheart, or those terms of endearment, but none of my clients have ever done that in a derisive way or in a inappropriate manner. It was always came from a place of genuine respect and affection. And a lot of people can get topsy-turvy with that, think they're being harassed or talked down to, and it is all in the delivery, because like I said, I've had that little lady treatment. Look here, little lady. And I've had that experience being a customer, right? I've walked into auto shops on my own, I've walked into dealerships, I've walked into parts houses, and I've been given that little lady treatment. And it doesn't feel good, right? And it doesn't feel good from either side of the counter. But as things are opening up now, and my point in talking about the language and the environment, this stuff isn't for the faint of heart. And does that mean that we shouldn't try to elevate? Maybe, but we also need to meet people where they're at. And does it sometimes mean that a woman has to prove herself a little bit harder than a man does in the same position? Sometimes it does. Is that right or wrong? I'm not here to be the judge of that. I'm telling you it can be done. My failures in my shop for myself were when I lost my temper and didn't go to my team calmly. At that time, I had not learned to let my emotions kind of filter off and then go and have the discussion. So sometimes I think my message was lost in the delivery, and I regret that. There are several times that I remember that I did that, and I really do regret it. That was a failure in my leadership, and I try now to do a lot better. Anytime I'm dealing with someone, if I'm still in my emotions, I stop, gather myself up, let all the emotions pass, and then have the conversation. Because, like I said, the the bitch word gets thrown around pretty liberally sometimes, and that message gets lost in the emotion. I think there's a lot of opening up. There are a lot more women coming into the trades. I think there's room for it. Um, I think with tooling and detail orientation and problem solving skills, I think, women can work shoulder to shoulder with men in the industry. I think they're if they've put the time in and they're who they are, then, and they bring the quality and the integrity and the authenticity to it, then awesome. I know there are a lot of really wonderful female service advisors and service managers, and I think sometimes women can bring a level of empathy. Men can too. Like everybody, there's no absolutes. Like everybody can do the things that they do well, and I think it's more propensity to do that thing than what your gender is. But it can be comforting sometimes to have a woman on the other side of the counter, especially if they've been abused in other places. Like sometimes having a different frame of reference, or a different somebody of a different gender behind the counter being the person to help them can be good. But no matter who you are or what gender you are, you have to bring quality. You don't receive respect just because you're there. You need to earn respect. You need to earn people's trust. You need to show your skill and ability. And you can't hide weakness behind whatever makes you different, behind your gender. Um, and I think it's important that we own our space and move through it. Um, for those of us who are daughters who are number one sons, a lot of time those lessons were hard won. A lot of times there was a lot of pressure, and we moved through it, right? And we've become who we are because of our experience. And now we learn to make sure that we're doing those things, again, through integrity and authenticity and not from trauma. Um, and make sure that we're doing better than we were trained. I often joke that I was raised in the Genghis Khan school of leadership, which was do what I say and then keep doing what I say. But that was the top down leadership model that our parents and our grandparents were raised in, and they just followed that along. And in our generation, learning to move through that and evolve our leadership skills are equally important for both men and women. So I've, like I said, honestly never really considered myself different, except I knew that there were a few extra challenges sometimes. One of them was, my husband was, 6'1", I'm 5'7", and so he never thought anything about putting things up on high shelves. And I used to kind of complain and be like, dude, you're like half a foot taller than me and you've got better reach. Like I can't reach that. But here I am doing inventory and pulling stuff off shelves with a pry bar because I can't reach it. And maybe that's a height thing, not even a sexist thing, but he just never could hear me. One thing that I think we do need to be aware of, and I think this is important, is that anytime, whether we're men or women, and we feel intimidated, threatened, by a customer or by somebody on the team or by a prospective employee, I think we need to be aware of that. We need to make sure that if, and this happened to me, where there were times when I was getting a bad vibe, for lack of a better term, off of a customer, and I would tell my husband, I don't want to get in a car with that person, or I don't want to be alone with that person in the office. Even with the counter between us, like I need backup. And I would go out and tug on his sleeve and be like, could you come in and do something in the office while I help this person? Because I don't want to be alone with them. Whether, and it was legit. It wasn't just because I didn't like them. It was because I felt there was some kind of a threat coming towards me. And I think if you have female employees, they need to know that there's people in the shop that they can count on for backup if they're feeling uncomfortable. And if you are hiring and you are bringing in a prospective team member, I think it's important that you have both a man and a woman there doing the interview to make sure, because men will often not register threats that women register. And, we really can't afford to have that kind of questionable energy in our shops, especially if there's somebody that's going to be going on the counter. But even if they're on the tech team, right? If they're raising what I call my antenna, they don't have a place in the shop. And a perceived threat that never comes to fruition is better than a threat that's ignored and does come to fruition. And I'm not being judgmental. I'm not typecasting anyone, but we've all been there, right? We've all been in situations where maybe um, we didn't, we ignored that little voice or that feeling of lack of safety, and something bad happened. So, for the most part, as women, we need to show up. We need to be ourselves. We need to we need to be willing to meet our coworkers where they're at, and as long as they're being respectful, give them a little leeway, because sometimes it gets a little rough. Like, we've all been around men who are, rough with each other, either verbally or physically, and it feels like, wow, that was a lot. Um, but sometimes there's a level of play in that, and there can be times when maybe it gets out of hand, but for a lot of the time we need to give the benefit of the doubt. But I encourage women to come into this industry. I really do. There's a lot of room, and we need that. I think helping to shift the leadership paradigms and to bring different levels of customer service into it, to bring their gifts and talents for problem solving and pattern recognition and level of detail, that a lot of women are really good at. And they can excel in the shop environment because they can become experts in their field. And especially given the room and the chance, I think that's awesome. And there are some really, really strong women leaders in this industry, and I really love seeing them excel and hearing their stories. So if any strong person in the industry, but especially a strong woman who'd like to come on and be a guest and tell their story, and we can celebrate their successes, that would be wonderful. But like I said, anybody's welcome. We're all here to celebrate everybody's experience and celebrate their wins and hear about their challenges so that we can all do better. But there are husbands and wives, fathers and daughters, women who have just chosen this industry because they've fallen in love with it, and they really want to see it do well, or they want to do well within it. I think there's room for all of that. And and I've been blessed. I've been super blessed by this industry. And as always, I want to give back. But I have been asked to tell some stories in the past, and I thought this was a good time to do it. But there's room for everyone. And as always, my segue is to move into thank you to WorldPack and WorldPack Training Institute for being our loyal partner in not only in the industry, but in supporting the podcast. Both WorldPack and WorldPack Training Institute have been excellent partners to me, both in when I was in the shop and now that I'm here in the podcasting and coaching world. So however you can support them by being their customer on the parts side, getting into the training and seeing how that can help your team. There are both wonderful male and female trainers at WorldPack Training Institute, and they're there to help you get your shop your way, just as I am. So I want to thank you for listening. I know this is kind of a ramble, but I think exploring this topic a little deeper, especially getting some guests, will be a lot of fun. And celebrating everyone's success out there is great, but especially hearing the female voices in our industry, I think will be a fun project. So, as always, thank you again for listening and watching Shop Talk Her Way. Please, like, subscribe, and share the show. If you have any questions about coaching, if you have a challenge in your shop and you need some help and just want to ask a quick question, the first call is always on me. And I really love to help shop owners, male or female, out there learn and do better in their businesses and have their shop their way. So thank you again. Go out there and love your team till it's weird, and we'll see you next episode. Thank you so much.